When it comes to well-being at work, body image isn't often, maybe ever, on the top of the priority list. Yet it can have a profound impact on how people perceive themselves and their abilities in the workplace. Our relationship with our bodies doesn't stay at home. It comes with us, and it can affect our confidence, our willingness to contribute, and ultimately our career growth. Hi, I'm Sarah McGuinness, founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and I'm on a mission to break burnout culture for good. This podcast is all about giving you practical tips and ideas to create a healthier, more supportive workplace and support your wellbeing too.
People who feel unsafe in their bodies will not speak up at work because it literally feels unsafe to speak up in a situation where you think other people are judging you by how you look.
In this episode, we're joined by advocate, speaker and coach Emma Wright to discuss body image, its impact on work and differences we all need to be aware of. We'll also discuss practical steps organisations can take to support healthy body image discussions and reduce harm, and we'll look at some steps we can all take to foster a healthy body image for the next generation. This is a topic close to my heart and it is packed with insights. Let's dive in.
How I got here, let's do it that way. So how I got here is I had an eating disorder that took me to a really dark and dangerous place. And when I had my kids, I was older in life to have kids. I was called a geriatric in the in the maternity rooms. And when I had my kids, it was really, really important to me that they didn't experience that same relationship I had with my body and my food. I remember promising them, if there's anything I'm going to do, it's going to help you avoid that. And so that took me down this very, very interesting path, because at first I thought that meant if I feed them healthy food, I tell them they're gorgeous, that will make sure that they turn out a certain size and shape. And then if that happens, they won't experience what I experienced. And in all my parenting naivety, life did not go that way. Red flags appeared very quickly in my kids. They were sneaking food. We were having arguments. And it came very quickly to me that paradigm that we have, that how we feel about ourselves is all about how we eat and our health behaviours, was not working. And in fact, making things worse. And so I put on my research hat. I've got a master's degree. I have a small insight into how to understand methodology and understand whether studies are talking about causation or correlation. Anyway, I went down a big search. Do we know actually how to create good body image in young humans? And this kind of blew my mind a little bit, because the research is quite extensive, it's longitudinal, and it's so different to what I knew, even though I had been down a path of an eating disorder, that it made me first realize I was still quite in it. I was not in a diagnosable eating disorder state, but I was still pretty disordered in the way I ate. And I still spent a lot of time in my head about my body and what I ate, and still a lot of discomfort. I still felt unsafe in my body a lot. That led me to starting to implement what I learned, changed a lot of behaviours myself. I started to understand what actual recovery feels like, which was extraordinary to me. I just thought I had to live with this kind of food noise in my body and this kind of in my head, and this kind of disjointedness from my body and surviving it. And that disappeared. I had a free sort of head. I felt comfortable in my body, and I started to talk to other people about that, share that. That led to, long story short, that led to giving talks in schools about how we can raise our kids to have a healthier relationship with food and their body than I certainly had, and how, generations before. And that led to writing my book. HarperCollins approached me about my book, which has been an extraordinary process. And then these days I work very much one-on-one with women mainly women, to really to coach them through that place of not eat. I don't work with women who have eating disorders, but women who have who want a much better relationship with food and their body. And that brings up a lot of stuff about work, a lot of stuff about relationships, a lot of stuff about just life in general. So that's really how I got to the work I'm doing today, Sarah.
Isn't that really interesting how much lived experience really influences what we end up focusing on, isn't it? The part that's really interesting for me, around this too, around women versus men, and we are going to dig in a little bit into that because I find that really fascinating. We are, and I know that you'll be covering some of this, is around the increase we're seeing in men's mental health, and particularly from a body image perspective. But let's go back to, what is body image and what are we talking about in terms of its various factors?
This is the perfect question to start with, because we often just assume what we know what body image is. And it's been really helpful to me personally to really understand that body image is four things. It is how we see ourselves, which is what we generally mean when we think about body image. But body image is also not just how we see ourselves, it's how we think about our bodies. It's how we feel about our bodies. And the most important one and the most under considered aspect of body image is how we behave towards our bodies. So in the end, how we behave towards our bodies is influenced by how we see it, think about it, and feel about it. So that's what body image is.
It talks a lot to that little voice in your head, doesn't it? Which we can sometimes be aware of and sometimes not. So as you said, perhaps we become so comfortable with it and it's so normal to have this voice in our head that brings on the shame and the guilt and whatever other emotions there are, that we've lost touch with the fact that we could live without that, that there's a term, it's like a normative state, even though it's not a normal, healthy way to live, right?
We become so used to it. It becomes the water we swim in. So we don't even know it's there until it's not. And that is the experience I was talking about before, where I didn't actually realize how disordered my eating was and my relationship with my body was until I did actually recover. And I was like, whoa, yeah, I no longer had an eating disorder, but I had so much loss of power. I had no ability to really eat the way I wanted to or take care of my body the way I wanted to. It was so in the background, driven by trying to fix and survive and feel safe, that everything was clouded by that. And you did mention, Sarah, about this is often seen as a female kind of centric issue and not as applicable to men. It's really understandable that we see that, right? That's how our culture is at the moment. And I think it's really true that women have had a lot more control on their bodies from culturally. If you want to look through the lens of patriarchy and consumerism and those lenses of power structures, women have been invited for longer, I think, to focus themselves inwards, keep themselves focused on how do we present to our world, because our worth has been very much on display to the outside world. If you look a certain way, you're worthy. And if you don't, you've got to put your attention back on yourself and keep working on it. So it's a really great way to keep people stuck and not use their own power. That has been, and look, I could speak all week about that, but I'm keeping it, that has been more entrenched and more ongoing for women, but that doesn't mean that those power structures aren't doing the same thing to men. Patriarchy has a way of bringing men into those power structures just as powerfully as it does women. So we're getting a real increase in bro culture, where men focus on, if you don't have the muscles, if you don't have the if you don't look the right way, you're not a real man. And then if you're failing, it's your fault. You're not taking the right supplements. You're not going to the right gym. You're not cutting out the right thing from your diet. It's all your personal responsibility to look right so that the outside world can see your value. So yes, women in some ways have had more time historically and culturally, sort of feeling imprisoned in their bodies, but that is not a solely female experience, and it is getting more and more prevalent in men. We now know that eating disorders, if you just want to look at eating disorders, are now showing up about 50-50 gender split in the States. I don't know, I don't have statistics here, but it's really starting to show that the pressures to look a certain way are absolutely as strong for men as they are for women. We know that transgender people have huge struggles with eating disorders and body dysmorphia and struggles with their body image. And it's not surprising when we look at things like the Harvard bias research. Are you familiar with the Harvard bias research, which is really fascinating? So over the last 20 years, Harvard has been looking at biases in communities to see if culturally biases against women, against colour, against gender, against sexuality, whether we're improving or getting worse. And it's showing culturally there has been improvements in every measure of bias except for one, which is weight bias. So that over the last 20 years, our cultural stigma against people who live in bigger bodies has got quite significantly bigger, while other biases have got smaller.
And actually, interesting mentioning that word weight. And I recall, so in my background, I might have mentioned I did my honours on body image and eating attitudes in midlife men and women, because for me, that age group is so fascinating because so much happens. And to your point around weight, I remember this coming up around that word weight, that for women, the word weight often was associated with shame and guilt, and too much is too bad, and less is better, and all these kind of messages. Whereas for men, losing weight was associated with skinniness and therefore weakness, for example. I mean, I'm broadly generalizing, but and so there's all these mixed messages even between the genders on even just one little word, which is so labeled.
It is. That's right, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot to kind of pick all those pieces apart and look at them and go, is this a female thing? Is this a male? Is this even gendered? It is really complex, and I think what we can take from that is, as human beings, we have all had the experience of not liking our bodies. I've never yet, I speak to big groups of people, and I have never yet, and I always ask, okay, so if there's anyone in the audience who has never had a thought, I don't like this such and such about my body, would you be willing to put your hand up? No one has ever put their hand up. We all know the experience of feeling like we don't like something about our body. Very, very human experience. And yet there are some people who can brush that off and it doesn't stop them. And there are other people who, for that, it is an ongoing experience they need to protect themselves over. It is really deep, and it really stops the way they behave. Does that make sense?
It does. I was going to say, I'm reflecting on an example of my own, and I'm sure there's some other examples that you may have as well. Earlier in my career, particularly being in, I remember one of my roles was in an engineering company, which was more dominated by men. So whenever I was presenting, I would always wear pants, because for me, it was like pants equals power, which is such a, like, now in my 40s, it's like, well, you wear what you feel comfortable in, right? Like, but it's that whole piece of, if I show up the way that I'm expected and I'm projected. And I'm thinking, even leaders and body image, there must be some really interesting nuances around what it means to like myself and the skin that I'm in order to lead, in order to influence, negotiate, all those things.
It's really, when I think about the experiences of the women I coach, so many of them spend a lot of time in our coaching sessions feeling able to speak up at work, just feeling like it's okay for them to share their opinion rather than keep themselves quiet, just go with the flow. And that's because they live in bigger bodies, perhaps, and their experience is everyone thinks I'm already late. Everyone already thinks I'm lazy, that I don't care about my health, that I am unworthy of speaking out, because they've had this entire life of being told, right, it might be from, start at 8 years old, being walked up to Weight Watchers and being told your body's not right, it needs to be smaller, and we're talking about potentially 50-year-old women, and that and back in the 80s, that was perfectly normal to take your kids to Weight Watchers and deal with, and so we've got a lifetime of feeling like people are looking at my body going, it's not right. And as women in particular, and this is not saying it doesn't happen for men, but I think it's a bit more of a visceral experience for women, that we're living in our bodies like they don't belong to us. So we're living in our bodies like somehow our body is there for the purpose to other people to judge us by. So they can tell how smart we are, how, how willing we are to work hard, how well we take care of our health is all visible on the outside. And the work I do is for women to really reclaim their body so that they really live in it like it is really an instrument for them to experience life in, and that they get to take care of it because they like it, not take care of it to demonstrate to other people that they are okay. So this is so let me come back to why we're having this conversation. So people who feel unsafe in their bodies will not speak up at work because it literally feels unsafe to speak up in a situation where you think other people are judging you by how you look. Does that make sense?
It does. And when you start to unravel all of the pieces that contribute to that, you actually start to realize that it's a hugely important issue in which we don't spend any time. So we spend all this time talking about how important psychological safety is. You've got numbers for people to call about bullying, whistleblowing, all those things. But if you don't feel safe as you yourself before you've even stepped out the front door, then that's a massive jump to go from that to I'm now going to report this big issue that I see and put myself up for critique.
That's right. That's right. And the ways that keeping ourselves safe show up is like literally not speaking. So we can already see the effect that has on at work, right? So if we're a leader and we're like, all right, I'm just going to demonstrate confidence to my people and I'm going to demonstrate speaking up and but if someone has already had the lived experience of if I speak up, I get told I'm wrong, then it doesn't matter how much confidence you're demonstrating in front of the room. So it shows up like that. It shows up in people pleasing. So it's just really important for people to feel safe that they please other people and have them like them. So you're just going to get people just telling you that your idea is great, even if they don't think it is. So there's real black and white thinking. So that shows up in the idea is either right or wrong. There's no gray area. There's no that idea might be right for some people. This is particularly important, I think, when we're looking at wellness strategies, where you go, oh, this is the right way to do wellness, and that's the wrong way to do wellness. Or we look at, or or we're looking at how do we help people improve their nutrition. If you start getting in black and white thinking there, you know, because healthy food for one person is really unhealthy for another. So bringing a lot of nuance to that conversation is really important. Otherwise, people start to feel unsafe again in that scenario. So there's all sorts of different ways it shows up that that we often don't talk about.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example, and at the risk of making it sound like it's a giant minefield, which it kind of is. I'm recalling a friend of mine who they did have someone come and talk to their workplace about nutrition. This particular individual demonized carbohydrates. And then my friend went to go and eat her sandwich in the lunchroom afterwards, and everyone, oh, you shouldn't be eating that. Then she got all self-conscious about the sandwich. And I was like, it's a sandwich. Eat the sandwich.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's some kind of unintended messages, isn't there, when we fall into that whole black and white way of this is the right way, that's the wrong way. How can workplaces know? Well, I mean, given that, as you said, it's almost normal to experience body image issues, but as a workplace, how can they know if it's issues they need to deal with? You know, is there some sort of measure or way of assessing where is this the greatest risk in our workplace?
I want to be careful answering this question because I think this is an area that hasn't had a huge amount of research done, and so it's not something we have a huge amount of literature we can look at. I think the way to look at this is more as a let's assume that there are people in the room or people in the workplace who have difficult relationships with their body. Let's just assume that. We know that 4% of Kiwis have an active eating disorder. So that's a huge number of people who are in a clinically dangerous position with their food. And eating disorders before, I think it was 2012, were the psychiatric illness with the highest mortality rate. And that was overtaken by opioid addiction. So we do know that there will be people we do know there will almost certainly be someone with an eating disorder. And then we also know that 80% of women, and apologies, this is women have the researchers on women for this, have a moment every day where they think they hate their body. So that's 80% of women who might walk past an image of themselves in a mirror and feel shame, or see themselves in a photo and feel upset to the point where it is going to distract them from they'll get all up in their head about it, which is totally understandable given the kind of pressure in our culturally we have to look a certain way. I think the important thing is, as leaders and as people who are conscious of workplace culture, is coming from a position of going, okay, that is going to be the experience of people in our organisation. What are we doing not to try and fix that? Because that is an individual, no one can fix that for you. So I think that's a really good distinction to understand. It's not like a workplace can solve that for someone, but a workplace can look to their culture and go, how are we perpetuating this? Is there anything we're doing that is making the space more unsafe than it needs to be for all of us? And the way to do that might be to say, how do we talk about bodies? Like, that's a conversation that is very rarely even asked. How do we talk about bodies? If you wanted to be really brave, you could even ask anonymously, please, how people want bodies to be talked about in the workplace. So you could but that question, how do we talk about bodies? Do we have a kind of understanding in our workplace that we actually just don't talk about them? Or is it fine in our workplace to go, oh, Lydia, you look like you've lost some weight, looking great? It's innocuous conversations like that that actually can make people feel very unsafe. Can you imagine if, I'll use my mum as an example. My mum has passed away, and she spent her whole life trying to lose a little bit of weight. She was never particularly big, but like the woman of her generation, she was on diets a lot, and she she spent a lot of time trying to just get the thighs a little bit smaller. And towards the end of her life, suddenly her diet worked, right? And she got all this great attention. Oh, you're looking so great. You're looking so healthy. Mig, you've finally done it. And then very quickly we realized that she actually had she had an end of life illness that was making her thin. Now, I tell that story to illustrate how often, and in my experience, when I was at my sickest, when I was over-exercising to an extraordinary amount, when I was totally obsessed with food, the compliment I was most often given was, you look so healthy, because I was fit and I was so deeply sick. And that compliment absolutely fueled my illness. How can I actually go and ask for help when people are telling me I'm so healthy? It made me really keep stuck. So what I'm telling you those stories to illustrate, if you're interested and concerned with the culture you have in your workplace, and you're thinking about, we've got this cultural experience of being in our body that for most people is unpleasant or unsafe or disordered, and we're thinking about how do we create spaces at work that are as helpful as they can be, taking those kind of body conversations just out of the mix can be really helpful. That can just feel safer going into work and knowing no one's going to comment. No one's going to say, you look like you've lost some weight, or you're looking healthy, or you're looking. It can create a real sense of safety for people, and instead you can have a culture where you actually speak to the person. It's great to see you today. It's great. It's always great having you around the office. Is a far more genuine compliment than you look good.
I can imagine. I'm putting my hat on, thinking about some of the workplaces I've been in, and thinking, if we came in and we gave a policy, we're not going to talk about bodies anymore, there'd probably some people going, oh, eye roll, here we go, being precious again.
Yeah, it's not the kind of policy that I think you can just slap on the wall and expect it not to kind of have a bit of a backlash. I think it's the kind of policy that you either just, I'm not an expert in cultural change, but it's the kind of policy where, as well-being people, you either start by gently, just like not doing it yourself, talking about your own experience of it. Hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to join me? Just as a gentle, this is the culture we've got in here. It's not cool to rather than a big, start telling people, or you bring people along in a far more engaged way by sharing some lived experience with people.
I was going to say that storytelling here must be so powerful. And I imagine for a lot of people, it's the first time. And I can recall talking about my teenage years and body image with friends I went to school with later. And we all went, oh, what a waste of time that we went through it on our own. If only we'd all known we were in the same boat.
It's isn't it funny that it is one of the most universal experiences, and it's an almost universal experience that it feels so alone. And it's also a very, very universal experience that it feels like we're broken. Like it feels like we're broken and it's something to fix. Whereas and the research really does play out this way, is we are not, eating disorders are not created from a broken psychology. They are created from a culture that has a broken expectation on us. And so an eating disorder and body shame is a very natural reaction to the environment, as opposed to we have something in us that is broken that needs fixing. Does that make sense? So in order to recover, you need to look out and go, there's an expectation that I keep my body a certain way. Otherwise, I won't find the man, I won't get the job, I won't be respected, I'll be considered lazy. And what I want people to know when we talk about this stuff is those cultural expectations are not made up in our minds. They are not something, it's not that we have just created that for ourselves. Those cultural expectations are very real. It is really true that if you turn up to a job interview in a bigger body, you are less likely to get the job. We've got the data to show that. So that feels unsafe, right? Like if we know that that's true, of course we're going to feel anxious about our bodies.
One of the things I found in my research when looking at men's body image was around how much men's was around ability and strength. And when they lost that ability, that impacted their body image. So as they got older and perhaps their bodies failed them. And so again, it's probably an unrecognized part of body image for men is how when you lose ability, again, it seemed like a weakness and a failing and all those messages around men and success and achievement. And again, I'm generalizing broadly, but there's another side of it. Perhaps it doesn't get the attention it deserves.
I think that's right, Sarah. And I think when we look at right at the start, we talked about body image has 4 aspects: how we see our bodies, how we think about them, how we feel about them, and then how the behavior that we have that stems from that. And if our identity is tied up in our strength and our ability to do stuff with our bodies, and that changes, then all those 4 things change. And so our body image gets really, really disrupted. And it can have a major impact on our mental health. If we start to go, if we get to that, for men in particular, getting to that place and feeling like my place in society isn't quite as sure as it was. I'm not going to get the respect I got from people. I'm not going to feel as much of a man as I felt. All that stuff, if all that stuff gets disrupted, then of course that's going to have a major impact on us. And that's all about our bodies and how we felt about living in the world in that particular body.
And so then I guess that spins on then to talking about the next generation coming through the workplace, because, they're an interesting Generation Z, and in that they are more mentally healthily literate. It's not a very literate way of pronouncing that. They are much more aware of mental health. But as I think you said in the evidence around, eating disorders are more or are greater in that group. And there's a lot more pressure. I mean, even if there's a professional group we've been doing some work with, and they go onto Instagram and see what others in their profession are doing. And there's all this pressure on, oh, well, other people in my profession look like this and this is how they perform. And I don't live up to those expectations. And so therefore, all those emotions we talked about earlier, the guilt and the shame, and it impacts their professional performance. And is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that social media plays into that, like you just highlighted on that, is both a blessing and a curse. Like, I think that generation actually is a little bit more able to, I think they're a bit quicker to grasp on to things and go, hang on, this isn't working for me. Because that generation is also getting a bit quicker at pushing back on, like, don't talk to me about, it's that, don't talk to me about, I'm a big person and I can get in my bikini if I want to. And, they're a bit better at putting up boundaries and able to shift culture a bit quicker than our generation is. Interestingly, in terms of eating disorders from a psychiatric point of view and from a diagnosable point of view, the biggest at-risk groups are teenagers and menopausal women. This is real. So those are the two times when humans are going through massive hormonal changes. So that's really interesting there. And it's true that eating disorders are still on the rise. And so the next generation, it is a big effect on the next generation. And they also, the conversations you can have with them, like when you said, oh, I think if we put up, we're not going to talk about bodies, we'll just get eye rolls and blah, 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 blah. I experienced that from an older generation rather than a younger generation. I feel like the younger generation coming through are going to embrace that far more quickly than older generations.
Interesting how there's some of those ingrained ideas. Just coming back to that idea around bodies, you made me think of that meme where it's like how to have a beach body, have a body and go to the beach. Not how to have a beach body.
We've all got a beach body.
So it's interesting how some of that language is changing. Have you seen any workplaces who have done some good work in this area, even if it's early days?
Oh, Sarah, I that is one thing I saw your question about that. I don't actually have any specific examples of this that we can look at and go, those guys are doing it. I think this, looking at body image specifically as a workplace wellbeing, is such a new idea and a new conversation that we don't have any big organisations who we've got case studies for this for.
Because if we reflect, there's lots of companies who are happy to market their products as being supportive of body image or health at any size or all those things, but it's that whole piece around what we're saying externally. Is it the same as what we're doing internally? Is there congruence? Maybe not.
That would be a good research project,
wouldn't it? Call out 20 researchers on the call.
20 researchers, that's right.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, you talk about being a parent, and just for those who are a parent on the call, my daughter is 9 and we're heading into those tumultuous years, and we're already doing the short shorts and the t-shirt tied with a knot, and we're very self-conscious and all those things in which you as an adult, you're like, oh my God, no. And you can do all that. It's great about what your body does, and think about walking up the hills and how great is it that you're strong. And you realize what a complete barrage you're up against between the peer conversations at school and the media and the YouTube. She was looking at a video on how to be popular at school, a quarter on YouTube, and I was like, oh, you're 9, but how do you explain to a 9-year-old it doesn't matter about being popular at school, because for 9 that's big. So, kind of as an adult, for a parent, for those who are listening, or you might be an adult in a child's life and an aunt or an uncle, what can we do?
there are so many things to do. I'm like, one of the best things to do, I think, is to be able to demonstrate some ways that we have dealt with it with some real reality. So I'm a big advocate for saying to kids, I get how hard it is to live in a body. Like there's no point in me telling you to love your body, because if you don't, you don't. Like there's to humanize it and to go, for me it was my ears, or for me it was my legs, and or whatever it is, and go, it's been really hard for me to learn that people will have judgments on my body, and I can't stop that. And we all experience it. So that's the body piece. And then the other piece is they see us on our phones looking at stuff and going down rabbit holes, and they see emotion in us, and they see so I'm under no illusion that I can just say, oh, we should just not do that in front of them. That's not going to happen. It is going to happen. I think the important thing is to engage with them in it, and to go, in your hand is a device that is more powerful than the devices they used to run the world 20 years ago. Like you are in charge of something that can have a massive impact on your life in both directions. You can let that phone take you just where it wants to take you, or you can be in control of it, and just keep giving them that message. You can be in control of that phone. If it makes you feel a certain way, there's something wrong with it, not something wrong with you. I think that's another thing that we can do in our workplaces, if we have the courage to allow our staff to say, if we make you feel like there's something wrong with your body, there's something wrong with what we're doing, and you need to tell us, so that we are giving the power back to people. We might need to do that in an anonymous way so that people actually feel safe. They can do it, because if you have made them feel, if you've got something in your workplace that does make people feel unsafe, they're not going to feel safe to say either. So you need a way to actually communicate that you will listen to, that, and when I say the courage, and it will take courage, because it's so understandable that we try and do things that we think will help that might not. And we have to be open to that, I think, and give ourselves compassion for going, we're really in a muddle with bodies. We're really in a big muddle. No one really knows how to do it well. We're just learning this stuff. A lot of people are in a bad place. But let's ask. Let's actually ask. We have the experience through our life. If we go to the doctor, we get told what to do. We get on a health coaching course. We get told, we get given a thing. We very rarely get asked permission. Is it okay? Is it okay for me to weigh you in a doctor's office? Or is it okay for us to have a wellness program that helps people eat nutritiously? And if the feedback from your people is like, no, I just don't want that in my workplace, we need to be able to listen and go, okay, well, we won't do it then.
And meeting people where they are, isn't it?
Meeting people where they are and asking for permission or consent. And the very, very basic rule of that is, if we are in an organisation that has a program that's to do with wellness that includes your body, which it almost always is when it's wellness, is having permission to opt in or opt out. I think we should get away from blanket, and I don't even know if people still do blanket wellness things, but having that permission to opt in and opt out is the sort of the most basic consent starting point.
So what is the impact of, say, fitness challenges on employees' body image and overall health? Because they're a popular way of involving people, but to your point, I imagine there are some challenges around that.
They tend to benefit people who already feel good about their bodies and tend to really deeply disadvantage people who don't. That's where the research comes through. And they tend, particularly people who are feeling shame about their body to start with. So if we look at where confidence comes from, and there's a sort of there's a kind of misunderstanding in a lot of circles that confidence comes from looking good, and so or looking healthy, or even feeling good. That if we feel good and look good, we'll have confidence, right? There's been a million businesses built on that idea. You just have to look at I don't know, the pinnacle of that is obviously cosmetic surgery or something like that. They will sell their services on you look good, you feel good, right? But we know that actually that's inaccurate. We know that confidence comes from having my own back regardless of how I look and regardless of how I feel. Knowing I can show up as I am and I'm still worthy of a say in the matter. I'm still worthy of having an opinion, even if I'm really sick, or I've got bed here, or I'm in a terrible place mentally. I've got my own back to know that I'm a worthy individual. That's where true confidence comes from. And when we start to make everyone go on a fitness program, if the intention of that fitness program is misaligned with what real confidence is, I think you won't get the results that you're really actually looking for.
So let's go to your tips.
I'm aware that in these conversations I can open up more questions than I can solve for people, which I know is an uncomfortable feeling, and it's understandable. And I want to leave people before these tips with the idea that if this has led to confusion, or like it feels a little bit
Like a minefield?
Like a minefield. Have compassion for yourself. It's really understanding. It's really normal to feel like that, because it is a big area. We're not going to solve this. This is not a here's 3 tips to conversation. It is an opening up conversation to go, hey, there is this humanity in us all that it's very new conversation that we're not really addressing. Because we haven't known how to, and we've got to have compassion for ourselves for that, right? But I do want to leave you with some concrete things you can do. The first one, so these tips are both slightly aspirational from our conversation. So number one is for leaders and for people who it's your job to create workplace wellness initiatives. And that really is to keep any body food talk out of the workplace. Now, obviously, that's a big tip. And how you do that, as we talked today, is there's different ways to do that. But just thinking about how do we get that? How do we ask permission? How do we think about how bodies are talked about at work is tip number one. Tip number two is both for leaders and for us as individuals. And that tip is think about how you create body safety. Are the messages we've got on the walls, are we talking about lose weight today, or are we using that message of confidence as how you look and how you feel, as opposed to have you got your own back? Do you believe in yourself? You are a valuable person to this organization, no matter what container you come through the door in. And how you might create body safety for yourself is you might get rid of all the Instagram accounts that when you look at don't make you feel good. Like you're looking at them and you go, oh, I've got to go to the gym and suddenly I'm guilty for doing this and I should. Get rid of those. They're not helpful for you. Start to populate your the input into your system, if you like, with messages that help you have your own back, that make you think, I want to engage in health behaviors because this body I have is for me to experience life in, and I want a good experience of life. And then we want to take care of ourselves. Not this body needs to be fixed and controlled and managed and made to look younger and smaller and that leaves us all feeling stuck. The third one is for individuals. And the third one is notice how much space thinking about your body and food takes up in your mind. Have compassion for yourself and know that it doesn't have to be like that. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that needs fixing. And there's a lot of ways that you can get that power back and start to embrace that for yourself.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you found this discussion valuable and you're hungry for more ideas, head to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing website at rowwellbeing.com. That's rowwellbeing.com. Here you can join the revolution, explore more resources, events and tips to help you break burnout culture for good, and you can register to attend our live recordings and be part of the conversation on the day. To those in our network, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.